My name's Angela Ketzler, and we're at Interior Weatherization, and I've been here since 1989.
My name is Herbert Solomon. I'm originally from Caltech. I've been here since 2010.
My name is Arnold Chinlek. I'm originally from Good News Bay, and I've been with this company for 19 plus years.
And I'm David Shear, and I've been with this company for 10 years.
I'm Jim Lee with Interior Weatherization. We are the local agency that does the weatherization program. We do the road-connected area in the interior of Alaska. Over the last 40 years, we've seen tools evolve that have helped us with infrared cameras, with a blower door test where we could tell where air leaks were. When I first started here 23 years ago, there was no blower door test, and we would go into houses and we would seal holes. We just assumed there was leaks.
I'm Jeff Edmondson, work for Interior Weatherization. Been here for a little over 10 years as a weatherization inspector. Here for several years now. Been in Alaska about 40 years, lived in various Southeast, Prince William Sound, Kenai Peninsula, and Fairbanks. Fairbanks has some interesting challenges for weatherization and different things to think about here maybe than some of the other areas. Heating degree days, so if you're below, I believe, 65 degrees, 1 degree below that would be a heating degree day. So it's broken. You can find heating degree days for almost anywhere in the United States. In Fairbanks, we have about 14,000 heating degree days. That 14,000 heating degree days, it drives our energy efficiency being much more critical. If people are spending $6,000 to $8,000 a year on their energy bill, that's huge. So if we can make some savings for them, it could make a huge difference on the affordability of living here.
I've seen, bills cut in half. The fuel bills cut in half by the work we've done, or more than that at times.
Because of our extreme climate, it's much more important here. And then along with that heating degree days just comes, you kind of get thinking, not really noticing the differences between our climate and others, because I'm used to thinking of there's going to be snow on the ground 6 to 8 months, where you think in other places it's much less. We start getting snow a lot of times in September. By October it usually sticks, and then it's not going to melt until March, April, May of the next year. So if we're doing outside work like digging around a foundation, that we have just a few months where we can fit that type of work in. Most of the rest of the year you're dealing with frozen ground, and if we're going to insulate foundations and things, it all has to be done from inside. Or if it's a house that needs exterior insulation, then we have to delay it until the ground thaws. So again, when you're thinking in terms of 6 to 8 months worth of winter, it kind of changes your perspective on things. Many of our clients are surprised when we tell them that we work year-round. And so we may work in the summertime when the attic's maybe 120 degrees, or in the wintertime, 50 below. We've experimented with shutdown temperatures, that we're not going to work below a certain temperature, and right now we don't have a shutdown temperature. The coldest day that I remember in recent memory was 52 below. We showed up at a guy's house at 52 below and kind of had the surprised look on his face. Wasn't expecting us, but we were there.
I think the coldest I have worked at was about 55 below zero. So I had to be completely geared up in Arctic gear, and we were installing rigid foam insulation underneath the house on the floor. And I can remember that we were using 3-inch screws to run through 2-inch rigid foam. And at that temperature, I snapped 3 metal Phillips bits in a row. There was so much torque going on the screw head that it was snapping the bit. And I had to switch to a smaller screw to actually get through the floor.
Trying to do what we can. It makes it harder to do things, but we do door and window replacements in the middle of winter. Guys will block off the openings with plastic as they're taking things in and out. When they take out a door or window, block it off temporarily with plastic and drop cloths, and try to minimize the heat loss. Working with caulkings and sealants at those temperatures are pretty difficult. Having to keep them warm, keeping stuff in the house or in running vehicles, keep them warm till you use them, and applying them and getting a door or window in quick before things solidify. Things like attic air sealing. When you go into an attic at 20 below, you can see the frost, you can see the air leaks. Instead of thinking that it might be there, it's like, there's the frost right there, so I know that's the air leak, so it makes it easier to find things. And things that other people in other areas might be theoretical, where you can see it here when you go into those temperatures, when you go into those attics at 20 below, which is very, very educational to see exactly what's going on. It's not a thinking it might be happening. You can, that you can see the stuff there is very informative and a way to learn about it. So that's, again, one of the unique challenges here. In the summertime, we still have to deal with the same hot attics that they would in a lot of other places. And in the summertime, with the long daylight hours, but it's pretty much daylight, for 24 hours a day. And in June, we've got almost daylight almost all day long. If you go a little further north, they do have daylight all day long, but then in the winter time, you only have 3 or 4 hours of daylight. When so you've come to work in the dark, work with a little bit of daylight, and then before you go home, it's dark again. So, the headlamps that you use in the crawl space, we use daily when you're getting ready to go to work and after work and stuff. Just wearing your headlamp all the time because it's useful most of the time. So that extreme, of daylight and darkness is something that you have to deal with here. Another thing for Fairbanks, the average temperature year round is, I believe, somewhere in the vicinity of 28 degrees. So if you look at the average temperature, is below freezing for Fairbanks. So just the fact that that is something that is significant. That just because the average temperature is so low, something you got to be considering. It's something we've worried about when doing the blower door tests and things, that you have to do it quickly. A lot of times, still get so you're not freezing up pipes or killing house plants, or people have parakeets in the cage. You got to be worried that we're going to cool off the house too much. And run the blower door just for a short period of time, do some investigation, and shut it off and let the house warm up again if you need to. And but there are concerns about potential damage when you're doing the blower doors at low temperatures. If you've got a wall, one side is the heated side where it's warm, the other side it's cold. Somewhere in that wall you're going to hit the dew point. If you took a thermometer or probe and started running it through the wall, you're going to start at 68 degrees, and as you run that probe through the wall, it's going to get cooler and cooler and cooler until you hit the outside. And like in our climate, there may be 100 degrees difference between inside and outside. Dew point is the point where water vapor condenses to liquid water. So most people visualize it like on a glass of iced tea. The warm, moist air hits that cool surface and it changes to liquid water. If you look at the weather report, it'll tell you what the dew point is. So that dew point is the point where water vapor changes to liquid water or frozen water. So that at some, depending on the temperature and the level of moisture in the air, at some point you could say that it's going to become liquid water at a certain temperature. So with a wall, if your warm, moist air can get into the wall, the water vapor isn't a problem. When it becomes liquid water, it becomes a problem. So if you're measuring the temperature inside that wall, if you're a water vapor molecule, as I'm going through that wall, somewhere I'm going to become liquid water. And then if you go further, somewhere it's going to become frozen water. So if you see a wall in Fairbanks in the wintertime with no vapor barrier, if you reach your hand into the fiberglass bats, you'll usually find frost. So the outside sheathing is usually covered with frost. If it's a house that's occupied, if you reach your hand in, it'll be covered by frost, and then that frost layer is going to vary from house to house, but it's going to be, you know, a built-up layer of frost. Somewhere in there, it would just be liquid water, if you're looking at that. And so here, what the most important thing is to try to put your vapor barrier in the warm area of the house where it's going to be water vapor, and you try to keep that well away from the point in the wall where it becomes cool enough for the water to condense. And that again goes up and down depending on the temperature. If you look at a wintertime weather report, even if it's 40 below outside, there's still going to be a dew point. The dew point may be minus 44. And one thing that you see here in Fairbanks is after you have the warm temperatures, like it warms up to 0 or something for a few days, the water load in the air goes up, but then when it drops back down to 20 below, that water vapor then would change not to liquid water but to frost. So you'll see our trees and power lines and everything will build up huge layers of frost. And if we've had, you're going along in winter and it's 20 below and then it warms up to 0 for a week or two and then it drops back to 20 below, you'll see a huge buildup of frost on the trees, power lines, the side of houses, and things where it's going from water vapor down to frost. And it just becomes very noticeable here as the temperature goes up and down. That same kind of thing is happening inside your wall or inside your attic if the moisture is allowed to get into those spaces. The same frost you're seeing on a tree is also inside your wall if you don't have a good vapor barrier in there. So that's one of the reasons that vapor barrier is critical, and the same thing with attics. If you have warm, moist air leaking into your attic, it's going to be changed into frost, and that's what one of our goals is, to try to make that vapor barrier as good as possible, keep that moisture out of the attics. If you have a high humidity level in the house, and one place it's really common here is on windows. When you think about a window, again, if you're dealing with 100 degrees difference between indoor and outdoor temperature, you're asking a lot of that window to not get. A lot of people say, I need new windows because I get moisture on the windows. And what we're usually telling them is, no, you need a bath fan because the humidity is too high. Even if you improve the quality of the window, if there's 100 degrees difference, you're going to and the humidity is too high, you're going to have moisture and frost on that window. So here, when you have a house that the humidity's routinely high, that warm, moist air hits the cold surface of the window and condenses into the liquid water or frost and keeps the area around the windows damp. And when that area is routinely damp, you're going to start to develop mold. So you'll get, depending on how the window is built, if it's wood, you'll see deterioration of the finish. The wood will eventually rot. If it's a sheetrock wrap around the window, that sheetrock is going to be getting soft. It'll start to get surface mold growing in there, and then the sheetrock will crumble as it gets wet. So it's real common to see at the bottom of the windows and on the windowsill that there's deteriorated, stained from moisture or mold that's growing in there because that spot is continually wet. So by reducing the humidity in the house, sometimes you can reduce the moisture buildup on the windows and minimize the chances of that frost buildup. In my house, I don't get frost in my windows till about 30 below. I've got off-the-shelf, store-bought windows, nothing special, but the house is pretty dry, and I don't get frost until about 30 below, and it's usually maybe there for 2 or 3 days, and then as it warms back up, that frost goes away. So most of the time, my windowsills are dry.
Hello, my name is Jay Fair. I work for Interior Weatherization here in Fairbanks, Alaska. I've been working for the company for 7 years. I am a home assessor and a field technician. All right, so we're going to be building our attic hatch. We're going to start by building the box of the attic. We're going to be using a 3/4 inch plywood. This is going to act as the side of our hatch as well as our dam to our insulation that we're going to be installing. Generally, we're installing insulation to a depth of 25 or 20 inches. This side we cut them at 15 7/8, 16 inches. And there's various reasons for that. Mainly ease of access. If you build this box too deep, then crawling up through the hatch is going to be difficult. Ideally, we'd like to get the attic hatch insulation up to an R70, which would be nearly an R80, which is what we would install the rest of the attic to. But there are some limitations to that. Our RO for the attic hatch is 22.5 by 30. So we're going to cut the 4 sides of the box. So if any maintenance needs to be done in the attic, someone's going to have to crawl through this. So they're going to be putting their weight on it. It's important to build this strong. I like to use 4 screws, and this is 3/4 inch plywood. And these are 2-inch screws, give it a nice strong support. I've seen people use finish nails to pre-assemble it, but it's very important to be using screws. This is going to be holding someone's weight. This edge here I'll be installing trim to, so I like to make sure we got a nice even surface all the way around. Okay, so now I'm going to be installing the ledger or the jamb in which the door is going to rest on. What we've done here is just taken a piece of clear pine, 1.5 inches wide, and then just cut a little kerf in it. And the reason for that kerf is so we can install our first air barrier, our first weather stripping, layer weather stripping. We're going to be putting 2 on this, kind of a belt and suspender approach. So we have 2 levels of protection. And this compression strip will slip right down into that kerf. So that's how we install that, basically like a standard door. Do try to keep my seams pretty tight on these because this would be an avenue for air leakage. Just using 1.25 inch screws, 4 of them. So now we're going to install our Colonial trim to the outside of our box. Okay, so we got our box built. Now it's time to build our door. What I like to do here is for the dimensions of the door, I go with 3/16 smaller than the smallest measurement that I get from my width and length here. I go with the 3/16. It seems to be the best number to mitigate the air gap that's around the door, but also not be too tight. It's a number that works for me. So we're using 3/4 inch plywood. We use a AC plywood, so it's got no knots in it, or doesn't have a lot of knots in it, but this will give us a nice finish for our paint. Yeah, so I like to do what I call a flutter test. I'm just going to put this in here, and hopefully it's just going to slowly fall down. That kind of ensures that I built this to the right size. So now I'm going to install the insulation behind my door. we go with 6 inches of a polyiso closed cell rigid foam insulation. And that gives us about an R value of 35, 40. Which again is not as much as we're going to be installing the rest of the attic, but we have to make those sacrifices just to have a hatch that's easy to access, easy to get through. Okay, now we're going to install a backer, and that's going to leave us with a little bit of a ledger to put our second layer of compression weather strip, and that'll give us 2 layers, both where we have the jamb and then also at the top of our insulation. So we're going to have 2 layers of protection, and that's extremely important, air tightness in these attic hatches. Anytime you have warm, moist air entering your attic, especially in our climate, which is basically 9 months of heating season. So you have warm, moist air entering your attic for 9 months, and it's going to condense on the nearest cold surface, most likely your roof deck. That can cause some major moisture issues for the home. We have a saying here in Fairbanks, we have 4 seasons: June, July, August, and winter. So that gives you an idea of how long our heating season is. So let's build we're going to build out a 1/2 inch plywood, our backer. So I'm going to be running an 8-inch screw to cinch down our insulation. It's going to run through the 1/2 inch backer that I have and then into a 2x2 backer that will cinch everything together. So I'm going to get an idea of the layout of where I want those screw heads at, so at least they're equally dispersed on top of the face of the door. I mean, you can also, with a 3/4 inch plywood, and one of the reasons why we go with the 3/4 inch plywood is if you do want to do a countersink and hide your screw heads, you can do that as well. And it looks like I'd like to go in 5 inches, 5 by 7, to make a nice even distribution of screw heads. So, cutting this a 1/2 inch smaller gives me a 1/4 inch sort of ledger. That's going to allow me to put that second layer weather stripping all around it. Now I'm going to cut a couple 2x2s to put on here that will allow my screws to cinch everything down. So I like to go ahead and attach these. So I know that on the face of it I'm going to be going 5 inches in. So I can just make a mark here from the plywood at 4 inches. And that should put me at 3/4 of the way through my backer. So you got the 1/4 inch here, the 3/4 to the middle of that. I just simply subtract 1 inch from the face. And I like to run a couple 3-inch screws in here just to hold it in place when I flip it over. Our last step here is just to air seal our trim. Put a little spackle over our finished nail holes. And then we're ready for paint. I like to use the stretchable caulk because when you're installing the attic hatch, it's very likely that you can kind of rack the box a little bit and you can get splitting right here. So it seems to work best to use a stretchable caulk. All right, so we got our caulk on, our spackle on. We wait for this to dry, sand it off, and we're ready for paint. So we've got our attic hatch painted. Now we're going to install our compression weather strip and our hardware. So I'm going to flip this over so we can get to our kerf that we've installed in the jamb or ledger of the door. And you could be taking measurements on this stuff. I find it easier to just kind of eyeball these cuts. So on these side pieces, I'm going to be putting a little bevel in the edge so we get a little bit of overlap. And I like to put it in there, install it nice and tight, and then get an idea where I'm cutting my second piece. You can make measurements, but I find it easier to just cut it little by little. Idea where we're going to be here. Cut our bevel. We get a nice overlap in the corner, and the weight of the door comes down onto the corners. It should overlap each other a little bit to get a real nice air seal. And we're gonna, that 1/4 inch ledger that we've installed right here is gonna be our perfect little spot to put another line of weather stripping. Overlap. Okay, so we got our weather stripping installed on the back of the door and on our ledger or jamb. Now I'm going to use a bit of foam to support my door up so that we can get kind of the reverse of what's going to happen when it's installed, and you'll see here in a second. So I want to get the weight down for installing our sash locks on the side. So get this kind of halfway closed. So the sash locks of old used to actually be strong enough to mechanically cinch things down. However, I'm using this really as a locking mechanism for the attic hatch. The weight of the door will really make the air seal for us, so we don't need to make the sash locks totally cinch the door down. Okay, so now we're going to install our handle. Idea where this wants to go in the center. We got what, 13 1/4 again. So I would say I've built at least 250 to 300 of these hatches. Sort of changes each one, sometimes based on the materials we have in hand, but this is a good example of our finished attic hatch. Okay, so now we're going to build a skirting access panel, or skirting hatch is what we call them. This would be installed on the skirting wall around a trailer. Typically on a trailer, the thermal boundary when they're engineered, is the thermal boundary is the floor. So you maybe typically get an R19 bat or belly of the trailer. We like to move that thermal boundary to the skirting wall. We want to protect the plumbing of the trailer. So this would be our access for any maintenance underneath the trailer. So we need to make it large enough for someone to fit through. First thing we're going to build is our plywood face. So behind this flat stock metal is a 1/2 inch all-weather plywood, and it's very important to be using all-weather plywood. It's very likely that you can get a very shallow skirting wall, so this could very easily be in contact with the ground or near it. So all-weather wood behind this, very important. So I like to give a flange of 2 inches. That allows me to put about a 1-inch weather strip here, or 1.25 inch weather strip all the way around. So our measurements, this being our RO of 18 by 24, we're going to be making this 2 inches wider. So we're going to keep that 2-inch nailing flange around the outside, which means we're going to cut our plywood at 22 by 28. So we will be installing a 4 inches of our polyiso rigid insulation, so giving us about an R14 or R16. Okay, so we got our 4 inches of foam for our insulation. So we're going to put a backer here that we can screw through to cinch our insulation together. Mark our 2 inches. So we'll just nip off our screw tips. We'll pull our plastic back for installing our trim. Could pull it all the way off. I keep it on there just for protection until I need to take it off. So this is the J channel we're going to be installing around for our trim. And I'm going to just use this little jig here for my 45. In the past, we had glued down the face of this. I find it's an unnecessary step because our J channel is really going to lock it in place. Then I'll use some little pan head screws to cinch this all together. Put a couple in between here. I like to use a little vapor barrier tape just to cover up our exposed foam here on the side, just for longevity of the product. And we'll install some weather stripping around here. So this is a garage door bottom weather strip, a nail-on weather strip. I have to cut it a little bit, just kind of due to what we can easily, products that we can easily get here in town. You could also use a standard door compression weather strip around the outside. You could use foam tape that's stapled down. You know, there's a lot of different forms of weatherization or weather strips that would work. We like to use this just because of the wide reach of it. And I'm going to be using a staple gun to put this on. It's just kind of a quick, effective way to put it on. You could also use the same pan head screws to put it in place. And I cut my angles a little more than 45. Just get a little bit of overlap in the corner. So now I can install a couple handles on the front of it. So generally I don't install the handles until I'm out in the field because it kind of depends on the orientation of how you use the door. But just for example, we'll go ahead and install them. Get a 22. Get a midpoint here. And it just so happens that using a T-square kind of puts the handle right where it needs to be in terms of center of the handle. Okay, so there is our standard skirting hatch access panel. So when we install the skirting access panel, we're going to be installing it with what we call a thumb bolt or a T-bolt, and it allows us to drive in a lag screw that has a reverse thread on the back, so it easily can be pulled off by hand. So it allows for easy access in the crawl space, and this gives us at least the equal insulation to the R19 blanket that we would be installing in a standard trailer crawl space.
We're going to see if we can make any improvements on your energy savings of the house.
Here on assessment, one of the major areas that we want to look at is our thermal boundary of the attic. So our upper ceiling, this is a 2-story house, and one of the driving forces of that energy loss that happens is stack pressure. Now, here in Fairbanks, we can reach temperatures of 40 and 50 below. So that dense, dry air is all around the house, and it's a driving force. So once that air is heated up inside the house, now it's becoming moist, buoyant, warm air, and it is being driven up to the thermal boundary of the ceiling. So the concern that we have is to make sure that that ceiling is properly air sealed. This stairwell acts as a perfect avenue for that heat to be driven up to the upstairs. So we're going to take a look and see what we have here up on the ceiling. And of course, we have an attic hatch right at the top of the steps. This is a concern for 2 reasons. One is we have the thermal loss of what I would guess to be a very, very weakly insulated attic hatch, as well as air leakage. And generally these are not sealed well, and because of that stack pressure driving up the stairwell, it's going to go to the weakest point on the ceiling. Where's it going to go? Right there. So we're going to take a look at this attic hatch and see if we can't make improvements. Now generally, we'd like to eliminate attic hatches, but sometimes there are circumstances where making an improvement on the attic hatch is a better way to go. One, if you have a situation where a client doesn't want a sheetrock patch on their ceiling, because that would force them to do a complete remodel of the ceiling itself. As well, if there's limitations on access on the outside. On this circumstance, the access is limited because the siding is put over a very small attic hatch, and there's also a danger of working to a second story off a ladder to install a new hatch. We've decided that we're going to replace this with a well-insulated, airtight attic hatch. There's also another concern with an attic hatch at the top of the steps like this. Now let's take a look up here. Here we have 4 bedrooms off of this hallway. If all these doors are shut and the bathroom door is shut, and that stack pressure is really driving hot, moist, buoyant air really to this weak spot. So the other concern we have with a hatch like this is this makes a path of least resistance in case of a fire. So you have combustion gases that are going to funnel up through this stairwell, as well as smoke. And if they have an easy access out of the house, then it's going to drive that fire. So we're going to be installing a new hatch. One of the concerns that we have to look at in this house is that because it's built in 1973, we have to work under EPA lead-safe renovate right guidelines. We're going to be cutting out what they call under diminisable levels. So with just some simple housekeeping techniques, we can keep the dust down and keep it contained and do it safely.
Alright, so first we're going to start out with a little bit of demolition. Again, we're going to be working under EPA's Lead Safe Renovate Right guidelines. This is under demunicipal levels, so we're just going to do some simple housekeeping techniques. We got plastic down right here, and I'm going to spritz this, and I'm going to do it all by using hand tools. We're not going to use any power tools here and keep the dust down. Some little score. Thank goodness. Oh, yeah. Huh. So we're done with our demolition, so we're going to wrap up the plastic. We're going to get this stuff out of the house. Ready to put the attic hatch in. We have about a 1/4 inch gap all the way around, so we'll have to use some shims to screw to our framing. I'm going to send up a can of spray foam for the air sealing. Let this in here. Yeah, we're not covering where the old. We can go. I think you're all right, Dan. You can screw this side. Nope. This side should go to this. There is our installed attic hatch. Air sealed with the proper fireproof rating. Water based. Done that. Oh no. Okay, there is our completed attic hatch, properly air sealed and fire rated.
I'm Jeff Edmondson, the weatherization inspector for interior weatherization in Fairbanks, Alaska. And today I'm here at one of our job sites to look at an attic hatch that the crew installed. The attic hatches that we build so we're just kind of check that, make sure everything looks okay for that. One of the things we try to do, if possible, is get rid of the interior attic hatches, since it's such a weak point in the thermal boundary. Sometimes we can't, and so we build a hatch that we hope is going to seal it and insulate the opening better, and let us insulate right up to the edges of the hatch. So we build these ourselves, but here we're just trying to make sure that it functions and that it looks like it's solidly attached and hopefully well sealed around the outside edge. One of the biggest problems with hatches for inspections is just they're messy. That you come in and try to open these up, and even if you're careful, it's still frequently a messy inspection, and you try to minimize the impact, but you frequently need to vacuum after you're done. Snap a couple pictures before I go up.
Alright, so we're going to be looking at the improvements that the crew has already installed in this crawl space, and this is a good example of the finished product of our skirting access hatches. And you can see here the guys have installed it with T-bolts or thumb bolts, also called hanger bolts, and they're pretty easy to access. And there's our finished product with our 4 inches of polycyanate foil-faced foam. And you can see that the guys had to reframe the access here. So this is all new all-weather 2x4s, and they cover the outside with a 1/2 inch all-weather plywood. You can see that the rest of the skirting is a T111, but we've got to install a product that is actually rated for ground contact. So let's take a look inside the crawl space.
Mobile homes here, in most places, they rely on the belly insulation. So we're trying to use a trailer in an environment that it was never designed to be in. And frequently they're old and damaged. So a lot of people have retrofitted plumbing, like these lines here behind me. So originally all the utilities are in the belly of the trailer. So in our spaces, a lot of them have been relocated underneath the trailer. So instead of doing the belly, we insulate the skirting. So we're trying to bring this into the heated envelope of the house. So we're using this blanket product that's more designed for metal buildings. But it works well for us. It's a great labor saver. We can pull this blanket in, it'll insulate the skirting and give us a little bit of perimeter insulation. And then we did a new ground vapor barrier. So with the new vapor barrier and that blanket, we can tape them together and try to make an envelope to hold our heated air inside this space and protect the plumbing, and hopefully minimize freeze-ups. Vapor barrier to make sure that it's as sealed as possible. With these piers that they're stacked on, you know, we've got untreated wood. If we put our vapor barrier over the top of this wood is going to deteriorate, so get it as close as we can, but try to give this a pathway to dry out. Or cause a leak. So kind of looking at these to see if there's any evidence of any oil leaks. We do find a lot of plumbing leaks that people have no idea are there. You can have just a gravel area. A plumbing leak may have been going on for years and it's not visible. You guys get down a ground vapor barrier, sometimes we will discover to attach it. You're working in some close quarters. A lot of times, depending on how the trailer's supported, we may have some flaws in our perimeter, but for a retrofit in here, this blanket seems to be one of the best things we have found. Trying to make sure that the guys have it well attached at the top, so it's not sagging or pulling away from the building. So just kind of taking a general look.
It's an extremely cold environment, and yet it's amazing what you actually find out there. It can be a 1950s home, and you'll go into the attic and find 3 inches of cellulose insulation. Totally inadequate for our environment. So you think in your head, well, this home has been here for 70 years with 3 inches of cellulose insulation. A massive heat loss for all those years, a massive amount of energy loss. Same with trailers. You can go into trailers where there's basically little to nothing in the belly of the trailer or a skirting around it. Fiberglass that's fallen down, and they're struggling to keep their water lines from freezing. And it's a major energy loss. So it is amazing what you'll find. And it's rewarding in the sense that you can actually help those situations, but it is sad to think that all that energy has been lost for years, and those people are struggling to pay their energy bills.
A couple of years ago, I was living in another situation, and the time had come to where I had to find a new home. And so I looked at my local Craigslist and found this for rent. And it was a flat price, which to me was important in finding a home here just because of heating, fuel, and other reasons. So it kind of worked out. So the first year here was all right. We did have some problems as far as the pipes freezing. The first thing that I did notice was underneath my feet was very cold, and I couldn't go throughout the house barefoot. I had to have socks and usually a pair of slippers on without getting really freezing. So that was like the first indicator. I knew that underneath there were a lot of issues going on. However, I did really love this place, and there was an opportunity to possibly purchase it one day. And so I started to put a little bit of work in. I reached out to Weatherization and called, and who answered was Tazlina. And Tazlina was totally awesome. She explained to me how to print the application.
When we go out to a house, we assess the house. So we're looking at the house and the thermal values of the house and the air flows of the house and the heating system of the house. But really, the only reason we're out there is for the client.
They have no other resources, so I like helping them.
You get to help people, you know. I think that's what we all enjoy, is just the opportunity to work on people's houses and do something for them.
How did the work go for you?
Everything went really well.
Some of the numbers I have here. We have a 37% reduction in air leakage of the house.
Wow.
Which should be an immense savings, and by our estimates, that should be a savings of $1,800 a year.
That's tremendous.
Which is about a 25% reduction in your annual heating costs.
Wow.
So, exciting
I never could
news.
have imagined that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
And did you feel any differences in the house yet?
Oh yeah, last night was the first night since the completion of the project, and prior to you guys arriving, my feet would be cold if I didn't have socks or some sort of footwear on, and that was not the case last night. I was warm, and I even brought fans in for the first time into my home. So
Awesome.
yeah,
Yeah,
definitely feel.
Yeah.
We've really tightened the house up. That's for sure. We've already seen energy savings just in the 2 days since completion of work, which has been tremendous.
We replaced the furnace for you. How did the furnace replacement go?
That went really well. It's
And how did our heating contractor do with the heating work?
they did a nice job. They were able to get in and out very quickly. The process has been really amazing, really professional. There's been so much explanation as far as what they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it, different measurements for energy. So that's been really phenomenal and really neat, and it's been just a great crew to work with. And I'm very, very honored to have been able to use Weatherization, and very blessed, definitely. It's kind of like an answered prayer, and it's really nice to have people here who are so eager to help you